Hello and welcome to Health Professional Radio. For this Health Suppliers segment, I'm your host, Neil Howard. I'm going to have a conversation with Dr. Eric Snyder from Geneticure. He's joining us on the program to talk about their recently presented data on a study that utilizes their algorithm, which can predict which hypertension drug would be most beneficial to patients based on their genetic makeup. Welcome to the program, Dr. Eric Snyder.
Thank you for having me, Neil.
Great. Now, I said that you're from Geneticure or Geneticure. Tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about Geneticure.
Sure. So we originated in Rochester, Minnesota, home of the Mayo Clinic. I did most of my training at Mayo, a pre-doctoral fellowship and then 2 postdoctoral fellowships, one in cardiovascular diseases and the second in nephrology and hypertension, which kind of formed a basis for this idea in blood pressure. Then I went to the University of Arizona as a professor and then to the University of Minnesota. Excuse me, right after getting tenure, I quit the University of Minnesota to pursue this full time. So it's been quite the adventure.
Now, you're the co-founder of Geneticure. As you said, you left the University of Minnesota. What is Geneticure? What type of a company is it?
Sure. So the other co-founders are actually my brother, Scott Snyder, from Minnesota as well, Dr. Ryan Sprisler from the University of Arizona, and Dr. Thomas Olson from Mayo Clinic. And most of our training is in actually physiology, not genetics. And so our panel is a little different in that we look at diseases kind of from an integrative physiology approach, that the organs interact and proteins and hormones interact. And so we target specific genotypes of those hormones and proteins that are known to be functional and common, and then build the panel based on that. So kind of a bottom-up approach rather than genome-wide association targeting and then down to the protein level.
So why the focus on hypertension and how that relates to a person's genetic makeup when choosing the right drug?
Sure. So one of our selection criteria for a disease we're building a panel on is there has to be a strong heritable component. And so there are several disorders or diseases that environment plays really just too large of a role to make sense from a genetics perspective. But there's been some really nice twin studies in hypertension and some sons of hypertensive studies that have shown that the heritability on average is about 55% for the development of hypertension. Less is known about the heritability of the treatment of hypertension, but we hope to continue to play a role in that. So there has to be a strong heritable component. It's a large disease state. And then, like I said, it's integrative in nature. The heart is involved, the vessels are involved, and the kidney is involved in the mechanistic nature of hypertension.
So when the test is administered to look at a person's genetic makeup as it relates to hypertension, how do you get the sample? What's involved?
It's pretty simple. So we use a buccal swab, a cheek swab, and patients can do this at their home or in the clinician's office. And we actually get better DNA yield if the patient swabs their own cheek. And so we take one swab from the right cheek, and it's just like a little brush, and one swab from the left cheek, and they place the swab into a lysis buffer, which is essentially detergent. And that makes it a non-biologic, and because of that, we can ship it through the mail. And then that goes to the University of Arizona Genomics Core Facility at present, where we assess right now 17 single nucleotide polymorphisms, and that's entered into kind of a complex math equation to come up with a series of drugs that a patient should respond to best 1 through 4 ranked based on genetics alone.
Now, would you say that what you just mentioned sets your test apart from other genetic tests that are currently available?
It does, because of that it's disease specific first. So there's some useful panels out there that focus on, say, drug metabolizing enzymes. And when you get a panel done on your drug metabolizing genotypes, I think some of them have 300 or 400 drugs that you may respond better or worse to, but they're not specific to a disease. And really specific to hypertension, what's interesting is the most common drug metabolizing enzyme genotype is cytochrome P450. or CYP2D6 is most commonly known as. And if you're a poor metabolizer of the CYP2D6, or you have a genotype that makes you a poor metabolizer, you have a lot of beta blocker drug circulating through your blood. And that has been studied about 10 times versus an extensive metabolizer, somebody who just gets rid of most of the drug. They just metabolize it very quickly. So they've shown that leads to an up to 27-fold difference in the amount of drug or beta blockers circulating in the blood. But blood pressure as an outcome variable isn't affected by that. And so really what's more important than the previous literature is the target. So like the beta-1 receptor in the heart. If you have a functional genotype of the beta-1 receptor in the heart at 2 specific sites, and you take a beta blocker, your blood pressure can go down by 18 millimeters of mercury compared to somebody who has a non-functional genotype or not taking a beta blocker. So that's a pretty dramatic effect. So it's a different disease state in that sense as well, that it doesn't seem to be as responsive from a blood pressure outcome variable to these drug metabolizing enzymes, but it may, those plasma levels may influence like side effects and other things. So they are important, of course.
Now, even though a patient can take their own swabs, say at home or in your office, is there a prescription required for the test to be ordered?
Yes. So everything, even if a patient wants to order the test, they can go onto our website and order the test. We actually have an Amazon portal where they can purchase the test on Amazon. But a physician reviews that, they get a questionnaire, the patient, and a physician reviews their health history, other medications they're taking, and some really important questions specific to blood pressure. And so before a patient can get the test, this physician group, it's called PWN. It's a large U.S. network of physician groups, physicians who do this for other genetic testing companies. They'll review the patient's order, their health history, other medications, and either approve or not approve the test before the patient can get it. Then we'll run the test. And then the really nice thing that this group provides is after the test, they provide genetic counseling free to the patient. So one of our core beliefs is that a physician should be involved from start to finish. And obviously, a patient will be bringing this to their physician. And that's why I said our test ranks their blood pressure response from drugs 1 through 4 based on genetics alone, because this patient's physician is going to have other information available to them. So if we recommend, say, a non-selective beta blocker, but a patient has asthma or COPD, that physician can go to drug choice number 2 based on genetics. So with respect to all of the information a physician has in front of them, we make it very clear that our test is based on genetics alone, and we don't strong arm any of these decisions for sure.
So basically, before where you would prescribe a hypertension drug, but other conditions within that patient would make that drug ineffective or less effective, now you can just bypass the trial and error with your test. How accurate is your test?
That's something we're still working on. So another thing we're a little bit proud of is we've been pretty open from day one on operating in the realm of science and peer-reviewed publications. And so we've published 4 papers on this first hypertension panel. The first was basically assembling the panel and studying the genotypes individually. That was a very small study, N of 100. And we found that about 80% of the genotypes predicted functionality for blood pressure medication response in hypertensives. Then we did kind of a simple math. Basically, in the heart, there's 5 important genotypes in our panel. If a patient has 3 of the 5, do they respond better to, say, a beta blocker? We found that result was also kind of spotty, which led us to the more informative algorithm where we actually score each genotype individually based on the effect size in the previous literature, or the change in blood pressure if they're on the target medication and have a functional genotype, and the number of peer-reviewed papers that are behind each of the genotypes. And so that scoring has built a more complex algorithm. And we just finished and presented and have now published a paper showing that in optimally treated hypertensive patients, about 400, if they match our number 1 drug recommendation then they have about a 7 millimeter mercury lower blood pressure compared to if they don't match our number one recommendation. And that's about a 30% or 36% reduction rather in blood pressure compared to not matching the number one recommendation. And because this was a retrospective study, another thing we did is we analyzed the data for patients who are only on monotherapy, which is about 100 individuals, because that's a confounding variable. Is some of these patients are on 2, sometimes 3 medications. If they were only on one medication, we still saw an effect if they matched our number one recommendation. It was a slightly smaller effect. What was really interesting is they had a 50% increase in the likelihood of having their blood pressure under control using the new SPRINT guidelines if they were on monotherapy and matched our number one recommendation. And so what that's led to is now we've done kind of a small RCT pilot, randomized controlled trial pilot, and we're working with the FDA to develop a larger pilot that has better blood pressure outcome measures, a 24-hour halter, and things like that. In our small pilot, we demonstrated that compared to the Joint National Committee or JNC 8 guidelines, which is kind of the standard right now, we achieved similar blood pressure control levels, that both groups had very low withdrawal rates. So almost all of the patients, 90+%, achieved blood pressure control. And then the genetically guided group actually had fewer serious adverse events. Again, there were very few, 10 out of a few hundred had serious adverse events, but 64% of those serious adverse events were in the JNC group or the standard group compared to the genetically guided group. Now, it was a small and a pilot in nature just to establish safety as we move forward to the FDA, and that's where we'll really get this answer on accuracy or effectiveness. From a basic accuracy standpoint, in genetic tests, sometimes these companies will publish that, we're studying the genotypes that we say we're studying, and we're definitely accurate on that, but we want to take it a step further and demonstrate effectiveness, because this is, in fact, in the medical realm.
Well, where can our listeners get much more information about Geneticure and the work that you're involved there?
Geneticure.com. We keep that pretty up to date with presentations we're doing and other news items that we have. And then for providers, we have links to our peer-reviewed papers and presentations.
Well, thanks for joining us this morning on Health Professional Radio for this Health Suppliers segment. Eric Snyder, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much for your time.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard, for this Health Suppliers segment with Dr. Eric Snyder from Geneticure. Transcripts and audio of this program are available at hpr.fm and healthprofessionalradio.com.au.
Thank you for listening to Health Professional Radio. We're very proud to be an independent broadcaster providing our content free of charge to you, the listener. One of the ways that we're able to remain free and independent is by having people like you become patrons. You can support Health Professional Radio simply by visiting hpr.fm and clicking the button that says Become a Patron. Your patronage of even just $1 a month lets us know that you're there, which in turn makes us more valuable to advertisers. And, of course, if you're able to afford more, then we would certainly appreciate the support. My name is Toby Longhurst from Health Professional Radio. Please visit hpr.fm, click the Become a Patron button, and support us if you can.